Well, I think we got a full crew here. Deputy Jones, are we ready to
Yes, sir.
launch in?
Yeah, we're ready
Uh,
to go. We do have one individual that signed up for public comment. So it's Jay Blaine, but I'm not sure I see him yet. Jay, are you with us? Um, right, Cami, didn't Jay sign up for public comment?
Sign up and I don't see him on.
Yeah, okay. So sir, if it's okay, I checked with him. He didn't have a specific uh
Okay.
to a specific agenda item. He just wanted to make a comment. So if you're fine, we can return back to that. But
Absolutely. Yeah, we can accommodate when he pops in on the next agenda item, I think.
Okay.
Between the next agenda items.
Right. Okay.
Well, action item. Let's see, I'm getting up my full screen. Sorry, let's see. Okay. I apologize, I've got too many windows open with all of our
You're fine.
agenda documents.
No, you're fine.
So we're starting with action item 2, right? The request
sir.
for use
Yep.
of board discretionary funds. Okay.
Yes, sir. So, sir, let me just give you a little bit of background on this, and then what our intent of staff is at your direction or at the finance committee's direction. What we're proposing here is a particular set aside of money to research and develop further security measures around the building, and subject to additional staff input and analysis, led by our superintendent. I think she's probably in another committee meeting, but if she's here, then she can speak to it too.
I'm here, Scott,
Oh, yes. Okay, great.
listening.
Okay, so if you'll open up the vandalism USBE, by all indications, and one in particular, from my interfacing with Salt Lake City Police Department, there's a marked increase in incidents in and around our building, and they stem from all sorts of different types of individuals. So I'm not going to say, it's only the homeless population, or we've just been experiencing quite a bit of traffic in our building, and then vandalism and all sorts of different incidents, right? And in the past, right, with our building being open and accessible between 8 and 5, the doors are open. Those main doors that I'm sure you're all familiar with, that lead out in and out of the main parking lot, accessible. We have the front desk that is manned by 2 employees. We've received so again, like from input from Salt Lake City Police Department, there's a lot of recommending and on their part that we do increase our security measures. SLCPD, my contact there, and I don't do it, it's off and on when I talk to them. They're aware of and they appreciate the fact that we have the security cameras that we were upgraded to, but they're strongly recommending that we take some additional measures, enhanced efforts on our exterior security, and that we consider having an individual beyond just our front desk counter people that could serve in a role of being right at the front door, roaming, and then also, as you see here, this was obviously damage to a car in the parking lot, and in one particular instance with the contracts we have with the state, statewide contracts, and Cami can elaborate further on this. We had an individual from one of the vendors that was actually there at the building to kind of just give the assessment on the exterior security, and was amazed, not in a good way, at just how much activity there is in our parking lot, including an incident that he was involved with, where an individual was riding his bike around, and according to this individual, that individual was looking into vehicles, into the parked vehicles, and he confronted him and said, "Hey, you're on private property. And he said he could tell he was dealing with someone that, was not necessarily coherent enough. There's some mumbling and some, gestures with the middle finger and, things like that. Yeah. So anyway, without the seriousness of this has always been there, and we've always been very proactive and concerned with the safety of our employees. So what we're putting in front of you here is, again, options, right? But because we're doing so well, because the board is doing so well in utilizing discretionary funds, we're recommending that we set aside a portion of those to further develop, research and develop. Just to what extent do we really need to go here? How this would work is as we move through this together, is if you were to recommend to the board to support a particular amount along that line, so that we can research and develop, increased security measures at the with the input of the staff, and then further discussions at the superintendency level. That's what we're seeking here. So, Cammie, was there anything else that you wanted to show or demonstrate to them on the increased issues that we're experiencing there?
That is that these are just pictures from the last 2 weeks. And I feel like that there's not enough, a good enough tracking process in place. Like things are kind of hit and miss as they're reported to me. So I don't necessarily catch them all, but part of this process, we would have someone there that could track all of these for us and see, what kind of volume there really is.
Sir, Vice Chair Norton has her hand raised.
Yeah, if that's it from you and Cammie, thank you. I
Yep.
see a couple hands up. We got
Yeah,
Chair
to this
Huntsman and
point,
Vice
sir.
Chair. Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
we're just gonna
if
pause.
Vice Chair Norton was up first, and then Chair Huntsman and Member Hart.
Yes, so in looking through the proposals, it looks like that there were 3 different levels. There was unarmed, armed, and post-certified. In your expert opinion, Deputy Superintendent, what level do you think would be most warranted? And I mean, I know I have no doubt that this is needed. My radar goes up the second I open my door, stepping out into that parking lot. So I know there's a situation going on there, but I just wondered, what do you think would best address the security needs now and maybe, for the next 2 years or however long this contract is going to be set for?
Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
So at a minimum, I recommend that we do set aside enough money to do the physical, security enhancements outside the building at a minimum. That I don't think there's any resistance on the part of any staff to do the exterior type things. Well, I don't, and resistance too strong a word too. So let me get to the input that I've received from staff is along the lines of, hey, when I go to a meeting at Department of Workforce Services, I'm checked in by an armed security guard, right? When I go to other outside agencies in particular, when I go into a bank or I go, I see these types of things. The reason why I wanted to try to be clear is that, we want to set aside to further develop this is because there are some concerns about, do we go all the way to an armed security guard sitting at the front door? So at a minimum, the exterior security, I would recommend then at least we start with an unarmed person, because it goes to what and from my vantage point, it goes from what Cammie says, is that we just do not have someone that's, going out and getting in the parking lot and things like that. And to be fair, in the past, we've had some not so good performing security services, right? It's just, I think that's the, and it is what it is. In this realm with security services, you get what you pay for. So my thing is, at a very minimum, I would recommend that the finance committee recommend that we absolutely set aside enough funding to do the exterior physical type security, and that we we recommend starting out with some sort of individual unarmed that can help us research and develop what we really do need. Do we really need, based on incidents and things like that, an armed guard? But then I would also ask, though, and I don't want to turn this into some long-winded motion, right? But it's really important, and I think I'm tracking along the lines of the superintendent here, so I'd ask her to clarify or tell me to stand down on this. We really do want to spend a little bit more time at the superintendent's level determining that. But so my stance right now, my recommendation is absolutely fund the physical security parts, and then recommend that we do hire someone to further assess, like an unarmed firm on state contract, and then that would help us at our level, right, management's level, to come back and say, okay, they really do, we really do need an armed guard, or we don't, or we need an armed guard and a roving vehicle in the parking lot. I mean, it could go to that extent. I don't know. So, Chair, did I answer the question?
Does that cover it, Vice Chair Norton, or go ahead, follow
Can
up?
I ask just a quick, maybe make just an additional comment?
Of course.
Our employee safety is critical to all of us. I want that to be paramount. And, I also, driving home last night, was hearing that, there's like a 25% bump in some pretty serious crime in that downtown area. So it does look like it's getting better.
Right.
Thank you. Chair Huntsman?
Yeah, I'm trying to track this a little bit. It's, if I'm hearing this correctly, we start with the outside, the physical services that be, and then I'm looking at the different proposals. 8 to 5, you've got employees there from 7 to 7. There's quite a few employees there before 8, so I don't know how you start with an 8 time or whatever on this. So I think budget wise, we've got to make sure that I believe if you're going to do it, you just can't protect. I mean, if we're going to do this, the incidences aren't just going to be limited between 8 and 5, and a physical guard present that walks a building inside and out and frequent definitely deters vandalism and promotes the safety side. And I agree. I don't think you're at a level of an armed guard, but it's got to be somebody professional that's representing our brand in a very professional way with how they're uniform, and they have depth of personnel to be able to handle time requirements, like when there's board meetings or there's something that's pushing on to into the evening. But the part that I was confused on is somebody to track, hire somebody. Can somebody speak to how would somebody hire incidences? Whoever's your building facility person can inventory numbers of incidents, like a vagrant or somebody broke in or somebody vandalized a car. What would somebody do to be hired to track incidences on USB East campus there? I'm kind of confused on that.
Yeah, Chair, if I may.
Deputy Jones, yeah, please.
Yeah, well, actually, if we can bring Cammie into this, sir. So to the question, Chair Moss, I somewhat disagree that. Well, it's not that I disagree. From a staff perspective, what we're also hearing, and I heard this directly from the Salt Lake City Police Department, was we actually have no idea that there's other incidents that have gone on, and we just simply have not seen them. Right. I mean, obviously, when somebody vandalizes one of our cars, we can see the physical damage there. But I don't know if you've ever seen just how much traffic there is just right across the street from us. Right. The SLCPD officer I talked to was talking about drug paraphernalia, that there's been even out outside of our discovery of this, there's been times when SLCPD officers have removed or observed criminal activity within, close enough proximity to our building. So my point with that is that we don't have really enough staff, and staff aren't there enough to really know just how much goes on, right? So where we're coming from on this is that, and this is an important piece. Yeah, this is an important piece to this, is these services are all on statewide contract right now. So we could bring someone in that can also be there at night, to determine just how much incidents are happening outside of 7 to 7 along those lines. So Chair, can we just call on Cammie real quick for additional clarification? I know she'll be more succinct.
And Chair, I've got a follow-up.
Yeah, Cammie, and I see Superintendent Dixon as well. Cammie, did you want to?
So if this helps, I don't think that we're looking at hiring an additional person to track. I felt like the security guard would be that person that tracks the incidences and then turns that into us as a report. If it's helpful, currently DFCM does pay for a couple of roving patrols during the evening hours, starting at like 10 p.m. until about 4 a.m. with their security company. And I get an electronic report of anything, like they say, walk the perimeter, check the doors, that type of information that they're providing me on a daily basis. So I would anticipate that this security company would do the same thing just during those daytime hours when incidents occur at the office, if that helps.
Thank you, Cammie. Superintendent Dixon, did you want to weigh in here, or do you want us to turn to a couple other questions?
Thank you. This is related to Cammie's comments, and I apologize. I'm on my phone, just spotty internet this morning with remote school going on in my neighborhood, apparently. I think Cammie actually clarified it well, but I would just add that we're really working on internal controls, and I think there's an additional internal control that we need to put in place. Sometimes Cammie's been our point person for all things building, and so an incident will happen and Cammie might hear about it immediately, or she might hear about it later. So I think that's an additional internal control that we can put in place so that once we get all of these security measures lined up, then staff knows exactly what the protocol is. So for example, the vandalism to a car on Wednesday, the employee came to Chair Huntsman's point. She came at 7 a.m., never went out to her car again until I just happened to be standing in the foyer. And I think it was about 4 o'clock, and she had gone out to her car and the vandalism was very visible. She came right back into the front desk and talked to Tony and Claudio, and they then told her, I think Claudio called Cammie. So there were a lot of moving parts. They did all the right things, but if we had a protocol, any employee would know exactly what to do. And if we have a person badging in, like having to be buzzed in, for example, like we're doing in schools now, that's an important feature for visitors. But then things that happen in the parking lot or even inside the building, everybody in the system will know the protocol. And that's without these other pieces in place, it makes it a little difficult. So Cammie is amazing. We are blessed to have her, and she's very wise and makes very good judgments about what to do and has protocols in place. But that shouldn't be a question moving forward for anyone in the building when we get additional security measures in place. Over.
Thank you, Superintendent. Chair Huntsman, do you have a follow-up? And then
So
Member Hart?
so just to what's being shared here, what happens out on the street, across the street and on the sidewalk and that's in front of our building, I don't know how the security person, where that, however you contract it, where the priority is, that's actually in the space of the local police department, in my opinion. But I think whatever we end up doing if we choose to go this way and contract, it's going to be on our own grounds and building, and more so in that parking lot. But one of the biggest challenges in that parking lot, and I witnessed it from Sometimes I'm in there like 6:30. I get in there a little early and just work out of my truck. But there's this walking traffic like you would not believe, coming and going wee hours of the morning, even into the evenings, cutting through that. And it's like open season. So the security, I'm just curious for managing expectations. So you get somebody walking around, when somebody's cutting through around cars and stuff, they can just get a key out and key them and just keep walking. I don't think a security guard's gonna, unless a security person's there to witness or catch it. But do you see, I guess my question is, do you see this extra security managing or mitigating or minimizing that walking cut through residents that like that shortcut through the block for access in there? Because that's from Vagrants and others, that's the biggest risk that I've witnessed out of all my years, from people being drunk and sick or on drugs and throwing up and doing other things there, especially after dark. Right around the corner for where the board parks in there, that's kind of a hangout spot. But did you have expectations there, Scott? Or
Yeah,
staff?
I did, sir, Chair, if I may.
Please.
Yes, sir, I do. In my, and that obviously I've only spoken with SLCPD a few times. I've had the occasion to talk with the highway patrol troopers that we utilize on the board meeting days. There's never going to be a time when you're 100% secure and safe, or, that vandalism could still not occur. But anytime there is a presence, and as more days follow, when the presence is placed in the parking lot, it does act as a deterrent. I mean, this is why we started out by saying that, there's a remarkable increase in incidents out there. And both my SLCPD and highway patrol contacts said, the highway patrol members up at the Capitol roam in the parking lots up there too. And the risk there is far less than it is in our building. So it's more of a deterrent, sir. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no way we could possibly just put somebody right out there to watch every car and see everybody that comes through there. But over time, when they do observe or see that there's, someone out there doing their due diligence to try to do that, it does tend to reduce, never eliminate, but it does tend to reduce. And we are in a position right now where we're just seeing just that marked increase. So that's my answer, Chair Moss, to Chair Huntsman.
Thank you very much, Scott. Member Hart, sorry, we've had some good discussion. Do you still?
Yeah, well, I'm just asking logistical question here. So what we have is what's presented in backup is a request for use of board discretionary funds. We then have some bids. Are we looking for the approval of, it looks like by the suggested action or recommended action, that we are simply approving money, but not necessarily what direction to go in. And that's something that then, where would that go next, I guess is my question.
Sheriff, I may.
And I'll just piggyback. My understanding is up to $100,000 to be used first for an unarmed guard, and then the flexibility to go up to armed after observation. That just dovetails with Member Hart's question. Yeah, what's exactly the spend?
Yeah, what my recommendation is that you make a motion to recommend to the board to set aside that amount of $100,000 to absolutely increase the physical security. But then to your question about to the board member's question about where does it go from there, to put it in the hands of administration, right? To put it in the hands of the superintendent and the superintendency to flesh out that, final over and let's do it over a year, or so, so there's plenty of time. And it's one-time money, right? To eventually come back to the board and say, we really feel strongly that but we'd have to hire first, right? We'd have to hire, and this is allowable under a one-time money type thing. But we all want the same thing. We want our student or our employees to feel safe. I think we increase the physical security that we do, research and develop by hiring initially someone, but that you leave those parts up to us, to do, and then come back to you for, because let's face it, if we go for a long-term security physical FTE type solution, we're going to need ongoing money.
Yeah.
Right. So this just allows us to research and develop really to what extent do we need, at what levels do we need the security presence there? So
Thank you. Member
Chair,
Hart, yeah.
I'm ready to make a motion if there's no further questions.
Chair Huntsman, your hand's up. Did you have
Yeah,
a follow-up?
I have just one more on the amount. And I mean, through all this energy, if we're really going to do it, I think you ought to have not at 100,000, but probably 150. And so that you're not having to come back to the board if you up the security presence because of an increase of incidences. I feel a lot more comfortable at that 150 mark, so that you're not finding yourself limiting at the 8 to 5 environment, and you could have something there at 8 to 5, and then you can also have something evening rolling. You can assess that depending on what's happening in the area. Maybe staff can speak to it and say, 100's plenty, but
Deputy Superintendent, oh, go ahead.
to me.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off. Deputy Superintendent Jones, any thoughts on 100 versus 150?
Chair, if we can also ask Cammie what her opinion is. I think 100 is enough, but obviously 150 would help enormously. The other thing that I would ask though too is that whatever amount you do land on, is that you're specific that it comes from the state portion of the discretionary funds, right? Because I'm anticipating that other board members will want to do research projects, but the FML is more along the federal mineral lease money is more allowable along that line. So 100 or 150, but can we check in with Cammie on what she
Yes,
thinks?
please. Yeah, Kenny.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate that. The 100,000 was the bare bones just to get us started. So I appreciate that Chair Huntsman has recognized, maybe this would be an easier way than having to come back again. I also did want to point out, we've talked a lot about the parking lot security, but I do want you to be aware we are having a lot more incidences of people coming into the building, and it's, they're confronting our little front desk staff and like they don't know what to do, and it's frightening for them as well. So I do want you to be aware that it's not just a parking lot issue.
Thank you, Cammie. Yeah, and I'll just agree with everything that's been said. This is a basic fundamental need. We need to have physical security and have folks not be afraid. We've got the usual type of concerns that come to any downtown area. Plus, sometimes as an education board, things are heated and folks are worked up, and we have that extra risk. So I'm all in favor of whatever our staff feel is necessary to make sure we've got, safety and a feeling of security and responsiveness. So thank you for that response. Member Hart or Chair Huntsman still has a hand up. Did you have a follow-up?
My hand down. Sorry, it's
There
lower.
we go. Member Hart,
I wanted to make a motion.
please do.
The first, though, I'd like to say that I'd like, and I don't want this to be part of the motion, which is why I'm saying it first. I really do want that building to be secure. And I think after 9/11 in Georgia, outside of a military institution, we took public safety or school safety very, very seriously. And we put in the cameras where, well, they were Ring doorbells now is what I didn't know then that's what they were, but you push the button and the picture pops up and you're able to speak to the person and so they can announce their business. I really would like that kind of building security. it does make me anxious going into that building, knowing that people can wander in there, of course, be welcoming and all that, but that building's in a place where that kind of security is only should be expected by our employees at the building. But I'd like to make a motion that the committee recommend that the board approve $150,000 in board discretionary funds of the state portion of board discretionary funds to enhance security methods at the USBE office, starting with physical security for 1 year.
Okay, any further discussion of the motion?
And I'm open to any friendly changes to that motion.
Does that
Wording wise.
Does that capture the intent, Deputy Jones? Okay, thank you. Any further discussion of the motion? If not, committee members, please vote.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you, and that is unanimously approved. There we go. Thank you very much. And I'm glad to see that come into effect, and thank you for the work examining the options.
Chair,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to also make the point outside of the actual motion that I agree with Chair Huntsman. At the very least, 7:30 to 5:30 for people who are, arriving in enough time to, just 8 to 5 is just too narrow, because you've got employees walking in and out. Those are high traffic times. And so increasing that span of time is part of the impetus for 150 rather than 100. In the
Yeah,
motion.
thank you.
Thanks.
We've benefited from the free watching over by Chair Huntsman at early hours, and so we need to fill a gap there as our chair retires. All
And
right,
possibly they could even do some research on, what are the punch in, punch out times for hourly staff, at least, to see, maybe if those hours should be expanded and in which direction.
Yeah, thank you. Great point. Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to, unless we have Jay Blaine with us, did we get any check-in on public comment? Okay.
I still don't see him yet, sir. So
Okay.
I'll
Right.
text him.
Okay.
But yeah, we
No worries. When he shows, we'll work him in. All right, next item, action item 3, R277-100, definitions for the Utah State Board of Education rules. That's an amendment.
Yeah, if I may, Chair.
Please, yes, Ben Rasmussen.
Yeah, Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with you this morning. There are 2 definitions that we are proposing that the board update in R277-100. Those are on lines 62 to 64 and 104 to 106, I believe. This came up as we were discussing the changes to the school fees rule that the committee reviewed last month. As we were looking at the definitions of evaluate or review and the definition of monitor or oversee, the discussion was that there may be some programs that board staff are reviewing or that board staff are monitoring that they have a responsibility to look after, but that don't necessarily receive state or federal funds. And so we felt that the definition for evaluate or review and for the definition for monitor or oversee was a little too narrow in that respect. So the proposed amendment would simply strike the language receiving state or federal funds so that it's understood that there may be programs such as school fees and properly administering school fees programs that board staff is monitoring or reviewing that don't necessarily receive state or federal funds, but that there are still obligations that we have to look after. So that's the proposed amendment, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Ben. And this would fall then under general control and supervision, and it could go to things where on the school fees example, a discussion that came in part out of the task force was that monitoring would provide a deeper and better understanding and assistance for compliance. And so that requires clarity that we can take that action and without connecting it to receipt of federal or state funds. And I think there are other possible examples. Any other questions or comments there? Okay, looking for a motion if anybody would like to.
I will make that motion.
Thank you, Member Hutchings.
I move that the committee approves R277-100 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on the second and final reading.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the motion? If not, committee members, please vote. And that's unanimously approved. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Blaine is with us now, so may we go back to item number 1 for public comment, please?
You bet. Back to public comment, item number 1, and recognizing Jay Blaine from the Utah Education Association.
Good morning, committee. Thank you, Chair Moss. Sorry, I never received the link, and I finally communicated and got the link, so that's why I was here. I was here at the beginning, but not on the link for the meeting. So, thank you.
No problem. Sorry about that. Glad to have you.
Oh well, thank you for the time for the brief time. I won't take very much time. I just wanted to express our appreciation for this for the Finance Committee and fondly known as the Finance Committee, and for all of your great work over the last several years for the members of this committee. We appreciate the time and effort you put into your deliberations, the treatment of these issues. Recognize the members of the committee that are leaving the board here, Board Member Hutchings and Chair Huntsman. The other committee members may not be on this committee next year, come the beginning of the year. Everyone's done great work on this committee, and I'm probably the permanent member of the audience of this committee, but that's okay. I do think it's the Finance Committee. I really like it, but me and Deputy Jones, yes, will always be here, it seems like. But anyway, thank you so much for your service and your time and attention to these extremely important matters for the students and schools and LEAs of our state. That's what I wanted to say today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jay, and for your own involvement and input as well. Thank you for joining us. Okay, let's move back to action item. Let's see, 4, state fiscal year carry forward balance status and approval for ULEAD. And I think I saw Director Everett with us, but
She is, sir. Yeah.
Deputy Jones, and this is let's see.
Yeah, so if Cami can pull up the spend plan itself, or if yourself and committee members will refer to this. Just as a little bit of background, these spend plans typically come to the Finance Committee in October of every year. You know, we do year-end close. State Finance says, yep, we agree on your carry forward balances, and then we subsequently come to you with spend plans from each one of the sections. Because of the transition that was occurring with ULEAD, we tabled, so to speak, their carry forward spend plan for the new director. And so now Megan is here with us today, sir, to pretty much, you know, wrap this up, or, you know, of course, at your direction, and provide to you what she is recommending is in the best interest of ULEAD and the expenditures of these carry forward dollars. So, sir, this time, if you'd recognize Megan, I think she can walk you through it.
You bet. Thank you, Megan. And I'll just say, as a USBA representative, I was on the selection committee that appointed Ms. Everett, and she came on just as everybody else was kind of working on their spend plans, has been reviewing the first 4 years of ULEAD, focusing efforts and moving forward with some exciting opportunities. And so appreciate that effort. And that's a that's a reason. A lot of that effort was the reason it couldn't come before us with the other spend plans. But glad to see this and welcome Ms. Everett.
Thank you. Really excited for the direction of ULEAD, and so as Chair Moss was saying, we have been looking at what has been done to this point, how it differs from what the mission of ULEAD could and should be, and then where we're going forward. What you have here is our outstanding obligations. Largely, those are to research entities that started research that occurred during COVID. And so many of those were granted no cost extensions that are still finishing those research projects because they weren't able to get into schools or have access to students that they needed to carry them out. And then as far as the remaining funds, what I was requesting is to use them to fulfill the mission of ULEAD. And I left that pretty broad in that I don't have numbers and bids specific to them yet, but these would largely go to 4 big things. The biggest one would be to outsource to groups, and we use partners with higher ed, which sometimes need research funding, as you can see from the past ones. But then also in the past, we've used the organization Hanover. We would have to put that out for a new bid as our contract ended with them. Also, it didn't highlight the exact kind of documents and things that we wanted to receive. And so we needed to rewrite that contract and put it out for bids. And so that would be the majority of this. We have 4 different priorities, and we can put out one large one. We could put 4 different ones out. We're also hoping that those priorities change quicker than they have in the past or are more responsive. And so that might mean that there's another 4 before the year would be out. The second largest one is once we have those reports and are creating this repository, we want people to engage with them. And so looking at research symposiums, conference type settings, things where we're bringing people together, and of course, funding to take care of those spaces. 3 would be in some of the conversations around how we might facilitate data getting to our researchers. One of the things that might need to happen is ULEAD procuring some hardware and software that works within our ecosystem so that people can access that, but not having to go through like the data and statistics team. If ULEAD is the facilitator, then ULEAD needs to provide the materials for doing that. And then finally, just promotion and rebranding of the things that we have. So none of that has really been done. And I think to the detriment of ULEAD because people don't necessarily know what it is. And so the more that we can do that so that we're out in spaces where people see us and have discussions and know what we're doing, then that. So like I said, the plan there is pretty broad, but those are the kind of 4 intended points.
Thank you very much, Director Everett. And if there are no questions, I'll just add that some of this is developing, as you can tell, and attempting to, get into areas that were initially intended as part of ULEAD. We had a pandemic over the last 4 years. We had a lot of things that made it difficult to pursue those options. But on the steering committee, I've heard some very concrete ideas about where Megan wants to take this. And so it's a matter of finding out, where within those avenues the money can be spent. And so I would echo that some of this is broad, but I do know that there are, again, the different approaches and tools that Director Everett's talking about will be fleshed out as we develop the capacity to make those engagements. And I'll just say Sarah Young, Chief of Staff, Patty Norman, Aaron Bruff have all been engaged in looking at how ULEAD can facilitate some of this work with outside partners, and that involves, data protocols. And so Megan's been moving that work forward as well, and that'll help to clarify exactly the best, partners and cost for using this money. Vice Chair Norton.
Yes, that is a really large chunk of change there, and I have, a big concern about that, especially under the situation that, this has been ongoing now for 4 years. And and like you say, it feels like it really hasn't even launched at this point. Could you give me maybe a few more, one or two more, a little bit more specific goals or directions that you have for where this is going and what kind of research we're going to be doing and how's that going to benefit the students of Utah?
Sure.
Dr.
So,
Everett?
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go
Yes.
ahead.
So we have four research priorities, and next month, I believe ULEAD is going to present those to the board and kind of discuss the history and where we're going with ULEAD broad scale. To just give a snapshot of those really quick. One is around attendance. We've heard that people have it's been an issue. Yes, it has continued to be an issue, and it is very much an issue now as coming back from the pandemic. We haven't seen the kids return at the rate that maybe we would have expected. And so one is to look at that. And so I think a real outcome there is looking at, ULEAD is designed to look at what is working and then produce that and engage people with it in a way that lets them put it into practice in their own area. So if you think about taking these schools that have these amazing practices and are getting their kids to show up into school, then that is a direct outcome to students of we're getting them into the classroom. So that's one area. Another area is in job satisfaction. And this stemmed from a discussion around some of the things that were really important to the teachers on our staff or on our steering committee. And they were saying, oh, well, this keeps me in the classroom and that keeps me in the classroom, but we know broad scale, people are not staying in the classroom. And so how do we look at the people that are satisfied, understanding that satisfaction doesn't necessarily mean you're not burnt out, and it also doesn't mean you're necessarily effective, but how do we find the middle ground of all those things and find what's going on so that we not only retain people, but recruit them as well. Then, strategic engagement through technology. And this is specific to, yes, we have all these tools and we have training on how to use them and those kinds of things, but where are people doing it really, really well that is resulting in outcomes? And then finally, academically based, classroom-based activities that also support student wellness and care. So one of the things people were saying is we know we need to take care of students, particularly those in crisis. And we do that through sending them out to the social worker, sending them out to the counselor and things. But what are those academic things that we can do within the course of a normal school day, within the course of normal lessons that are resulting in keeping those kids in the classroom, but also taking care of them. And then also that benefits academic achievement. So those are kind of the four big things that we're looking at this point in time. Yeah, and then specific to like the contracts around research. So in the past, and the ones that are outstanding, they were pretty broad in scope. People could kind of apply and really be approved for things that maybe were tangentially related, and we don't want to do that. So we want to go after things that are very specific. And in the legislation for ULEAD, it talks about innovative practice reports. It's very specific design that was created with the steering committee, and then also with members of higher ed to say, like, this is the kind of practitioner report that's really needed. And so like I said, one of the big things would be getting groups to produce that specificity of report, but we would hope for a much greater number. So instead of one contract awarded to someone in a higher ed institution and it takes them multiple years to research and it's quite expensive, hoping for many, many more, but smaller, quicker, more responsive.
Thank you, Director Everett. Any follow-up? Does that respond to the question, Vice Chair?
It certainly did, and I took good notes. I'll be looking for that in the future. Great.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman.
Yes, I've got a request, but I'd like to make, I'll make a motion afterwards. And I think it would benefit the board moving forward if we can add into the backup on this spend plan, the four big rocks, the four big things that ULEAD is going to work on, and then also a little bit of an inventory on the strategy. So if they could add some slides or some additional input there for, this is all about managing expectations. And I think it would benefit the board as it goes before them if it comes out of committee. And I'd like to make a motion.
Please do.
But I don't want to tie, first of all, without objection, Chair, do you think staff can put that into backups?
Yeah, could we do that? And when we reviewed the other spend plans, we looked at, asking for a bit of information about the basis for decisions and evidence or history that supported a particular item for the carryover spend plan. And as I indicated, Director Everett is new here, and so part of this is reformulating, and I think that would be helpful when it comes to the full board. That should be part of our standard practice. And I'll just add, what's come so far is a pretty solid repository of some kind of thematic best practice reports and some other things. But what Director Everett is steering towards are very specific evidence-based digs into best practice outliers, and using those also on the back end. The front side is identifying who are the outliers. I think that's critical coming out of COVID, who's really doing things well, and then engaging with our higher ed partners for the analysis. That was, as she's indicated prior, sort of ad hoc. We've been talking to researchers who want to be engaged on an ongoing semester by semester basis. And then on the back end, connecting those who have been highlighted, the research partners and the field that's interested in these areas that have been highlighted by the steering committee. And so, supporting that engagement in kind of a targeted statewide PLC approach. So each of those, I think, has been identified as something carrying out the initial intent, and excited to see it. But it would be helpful to get, and I've seen that on the steering committee. So I would assume Director Everett can put some of that in for the full board. Did Chris, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if there's a commitment to put that all in there.
Can we ask Director Everett?
Yes, absolutely. And we already have some of that information in terms of like an overview of what ULEAD does, where it's been and where it's going, a logic model for how we plan to carry out the vision of that, and then our topic write-ups on the different elements. In addition to, I believe that ULEAD will be presenting to the board on all of that we shared with the leadership committee this past.
Well, I just like it in this packet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it kind of helps support it. It is a large sum of money and carry forward, and I understand where COVID's kind of set it back a little bit, but eventually there's got to be an ROI on all of this. So I'm ready to make a motion.
I saw Vice Chair Norton's hand up first. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to make a quick comment, and that is that I totally agree with the backup. I think that's really important. I think in the other cases we didn't have it because, and the analogy I would use is I feel like they are kind of brick and mortar and they're established and we see that outcome, where this is more, kind of the way the virtual is as opposed to brick and mortar. And it's new, it's very important, and it's no, this is no knock on the work that has done or will be done in the future. But I do think that we have that, like you mentioned, the branding and the information and the education needs to be out there. And I think it would be a great way to get started is to educate the board on what is going on and where you're going. So thank you for asking for that backup. I think would be helpful.
Thank you both. Chair Huntsman, did you have
I would like to make a motion that the Finance Committee recommends that the board approve the ULEAD spend plan for the unencumbered state fiscal year 2022 carry forward balances. Roger.
any further discussion of the motion? If not, board members, please vote. Committee members. And that is approved unanimously. Thank you very much, Director Everett, for
Thank
joining
you.
us. Okay, next item. Let me just get back here on my screen. I know you've got it up there. Item 6, school construction timeline, review and approval of the school construction resource manual. So this is another step along the process. We started last month or the month before, made a couple of decisions already about what we like and don't like. We chose not to vote to turn this over to DFCM, but to approve the governor's recommendations on other action items that should bring some more clarity and guidance to the school construction, cost process and the manual is part of that. So I'll turn to Deputy Jones to go into the weeds here.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So if we could pull the timeline itself from the backups up. So Chair Moss is spot on. This is the point we're at right now. Our interest as staff is, for lack of a better term, is to manage expectations, especially on the part of the governor's office. And, due to the other considerations of how much staff here at the USBE are doing. Clearly, yesterday, the board adopted and fully supports the governor's recommendations, as do we. But what we really try to do as staff, whenever, an additional task or requirement comes on board, we really try to take a close look at all the other moving parts and muscle movements that we've got going on, and then provide you, the finance committee, to recommend to the board a particular line or timeline, so that there's no misunderstanding about how well. So clearly we establish, a deliverable timeline, a goal. I can't help but think about how the legislature codified that, we have to have USIMs up and operational by July 1st of 2024. So what this timeline does, and it's over it focuses on the 3 areas or recommendation of the governor's office, is provides us the ability to ask for the finance committee to recommend to the board that we follow this timeline, so that over this timeline we can continually update the board, or if for some reason circumstances change, then we can come out and revise the timeline or work together on that. So I hope that the finance committee members see the value add in this, and that I'm not wasting time and effort here at this point on the finance committee, but it's just so important to us to have the board support on a particular timeline. If you want to adjust it or say nope, you got to do it faster or later, we really do try to do everything at the direction of the board. Now, so I want to draw particular attention, Chair Moss, if I may, to the second bullet. All 3 are important, but now if Cami will back out of this and pull up the resource manual, just on that second bullet alone, I'd just like to demonstrate to the finance communities and the public of what we're dealing with here.
Yes, please.
Yeah. See, so the resource manual is 267 pages long, right? And we anticipate that there will be considerable effort on the part of, and for now, I'll just name it a panel. It'll consist of representatives from us, from DFCM, from the governor's office, to get to what right is in support of our governor and his recommendations. And but I think you can see the magnitude of just that second bullet alone. And we're really, I think we've demonstrated here as staff that we really rely heavily on a bottom up approach, where we're really going to want to get input from the field, right? On hey, is this outdated? Is this or what else do we need to add in here? So I just want to pause there, and then Chair, if you'll recognize Sam, I think he's going to introduce our new school construction specialist and add additional comments. So can you recognize, please? Yeah, thank you, sir.
And Yuri, thank you.
Yeah, great to be here, School Finance Director Sam Yuri. And we are very grateful to have Dean Dykstra with us. If you've not met him, Dean is our new school construction specialist, and he came with a few years of experience at Granite School District. And so we're very pleased to have him on board, and his knowledge and experience and his ability to as Deputy Superintendent Jones mentioned, coordinate with with LEA leaders and school building officials and those sorts of things to make these updates. If you wouldn't mind going back to the timeline, Cami, and we will note that Dean is a department of one, and so we want to balance his day-to-day responsibilities of issuing those project numbers and coordinating with LEAs on their ongoing construction projects with these more kind of longer term projects. But we do have some kind of concurrent things that are happening. So on the first bullet with the standardized cost reporting system, we have been looking, and there may be some legislation run this year with the school plant capital outlay report. And so as we look at that and maybe receive some recommendations from LEAs, we feel like that's a good concurrent process to make that change and make that update so that we're getting, you know, as much as we can, some comparable costs across the state, so LEAs can make sure they're getting a good bang for their buck, and noting that there are different types of construction, and noting that the current school plant capital outlay report, it really is kind of difficult to compare apples to apples with one school to another. You know, you may have a charter school that's constructed in a completely different manner than a district school, and vice versa. So we are appreciative of these opportunities to make these updates. You know, the second and third items kind of go together as we develop that resource manual. We're working on, you know, preparing and developing that repository of materials that kind of coincide with the resource manual, different tools that LEAs can use as they do construction projects, be it additions, refurbishments, or new construction. With that, I'll see if Dean has anything to add, and ask the board members and public to welcome Dean to his new position.
Thank you, Dean. We are very happy to have you. Are you there?
I am here. Thank you for having me today.
Go ahead. You want to just give us a brief intro on yourself before you take care of business?
Sure. I'm originally from the state of Iowa. I was at the University of Iowa for 20 years in planning, design, and construction. I was in the construction end of that, effectively working on campus projects. We came west 3 years ago, just in time for COVID. I took a position at Granite School District as a senior project manager and senior inspector there.
Right on. Well, thank you. You're here just in time, and we appreciate you joining us. Go ahead. Did you want to address?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of work to do with the update of that construction resource manual. And as Deputy Jones said, that, it needs to, we need to get a lot of input on that. I have a meeting with him next week where I'd like to discuss some of these, as well as how you see the repository for resources and tools that the LEAs can utilize. Just want to make sure that I have a good understanding of what we envision that to be.
Thank you. Any questions from committee members? Okay.
Yes, I want to welcome Dean as a former Midwesterner. I'm not sure when my Spartans play you, or if we already have in football. I can't remember. It's not a memorable football season this year, but outside of the Big Ten, I'm glad to see a fellow Big Ten member, and welcome, and I'm glad you're here. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, board members. We'll entertain a motion, or I can bring it. Oh, there we go. I can bring this one. The Finance Committee recommends that the board approve the timeline for the implementation of the governor's recommendations and the resource manual update as required by rule. Any discussion of that motion? Okay, committee members, please vote. And that, let's see. Oh, there we go. That's unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Okay, moving along. Item number, well, let's see. I think that's it for our action items, isn't it? So going to item 6, information on mid-year updates to the MSP. Who's?
Well, sir, I'll tee this off, but then we'll turn it over to our excellent staff. So if you'll recall, the board has amended your bylaws to require that this position provide the board and, via the finance committee, a mid-year update. Clearly, you can see the magnitude of the impacts of what a mid-year update means and the impacts of the mid-year update to our LEAs. In the past, there's been, lack of, I provide, or this position provides you the monthly budget report. But as I brought up yesterday, we have one issue that will resolve, eventually with the TSSA money from a prior year. It's really important to us that, and it is just an information item. I mean, if there was a particular action we thought we needed, we would do that. But it's really important to us that all of our actions within the staff here are forward facing to you as our leaders, as the board, first and foremost, but to the public and, essentially our business administrators, right? So that we can support and, very clearly demonstrate our resolve to ensuring that all of the actions on the part of the USB staff as it relates to public education funding are all forward facing. So with that, sir, if you'll call on Sam, recognize Sam and his great crew, they'll walk you through the mid-year updates in accordance with the board bylaws.
You bet. Thank you. And welcome back, Sam.
Yeah, good to be here, and wanted to recognize our minimum school program administrator, Dell Frost, and also our minimum school program analyst, Brett Baker. And with that, before they get started presented, I just wanted to publicly thank them for all of their very hard and detailed work. It is quite a tight turnaround to get all of the data from October 1 counts. And then from there, we calculate the average daily membership, or ADM, and then go to work adjusting these programs that need the adjustments. So I'll turn the time over here to Dale, and Cami has been gracious enough to offer to present here. So I believe we'll go with that first backup.
Sounds good. Thank you. Floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Chair Moss, members of the committee. Good morning. It's Dale Frost, a minimum school program administrator. So Cami, if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce our new analyst. He's been here a month and a half or so, Brett Baker. And Chair, if you will allow, could Brett quickly introduce himself to the committee?
I was just going to ask that. Yes, please. Thank you and welcome, Brett.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair and members of the board. Brett Baker, originally from Seattle, Washington, got a master's degree in public administration from BYU a few years ago. Then I started working at the Utah Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice and came here from there. It's been a bit of drinking from a fire hose trying to get this mid-year update going, but it's been fun, and I'm looking forward to continuing to support you and the students of Utah. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'll just say, we've had retention. There's a war on talent. We've had trouble, losing folks. So glad to see people coming in and the breadth and depth of backgrounds that you're bringing. So we're very glad that we've been able to attract great folks to come in. So thank you, Brett.
And Chair, if I may, also say I'm very grateful to have Brett, and he is very capable. I've thrown him right into the deep end, and he is swimming well. There's just so much to learn on this front, but in the past, the model for good or bad has been put all of this on one person until they get burnt out, and that's not a sustainable strategy. And I'm really grateful to have the support of Brett. So I appreciate that. So if I can move forward into this, you'll see, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, please.
You'll see that this presentation, the numbers are slightly different, but the story is very much the same that I told yesterday. And so you'll see some of kind of the similar impacts and themes. So if you could, Cami, you can stay on that first slide, please. Thanks. All right. So just to quickly reiterate what I said yesterday about the process. So the minimum school program, again, accounts for 80% of the funds that schools receive. It's a little over $5 billion. So it's a small chunk of change. And, it's important, it's important that we continually monitor this, because this is the most important funding source for our schools so they can serve students. So after each legislative session, financial operations, my team, we come out with the legislative estimates, which is essentially allocating out to every LEA all of the basic school program funds, and a number of the funds in the related to basic, and all the funds in the voted in board, which are the 3 line items of the MSP. So we do that in March and April, and those again are based on projections from the Common Data Committee, as I talked to yesterday. Now we have 3 really important data sets that we use to update. There are others, but these are by far the most important in the mid-year update. So we now have, for the 23 year, we have 22 ADM. Obviously in March and April, the school year isn't done. So we don't have final ADM. And so we have to project ADM from last year. And then we have enrollment from this year, which helps us to project ADM for this year. Those often enrollments and ADM get confused. The vast majority of the basic school programs are based on ADM. But October 1 counts are what we use to project current year ADM, which we will not have. And so those go into the formulas. And then a number of formulas are based on teacher counts. The legislative estimates uses prior year teacher counts from the November 15th Cactus update from last year. And we're truing up to current teacher counts that were just pulled, a couple weeks ago. So hopefully that can give you a little more of, like, when people are asking, why did this or this change? Usually the reason is that one of these data points changed from our projections to what the actuals were. And then finally in April, we will update the major change occurs that we have final tax collections for the year. And so we update to account for that. So any questions on the MSP process from the committee? If not, if we can move on, Cami. Thank you. So you saw this before. I just want to highlight a couple numbers again. On that total row at the bottom, the CDC projections for enrollments for this year's October 1 were 678,927. And it came in at 675,660. So 3,267 students less. And so that is what's driving the majority of the changes, because we now have, the other thing that's not shown here is we had projected ADM, and now we have actual 22 ADM. But then these growth projections are what we use to project 23 ADM, and those are down below what we had originally projected. So that's all I'm covering here. I don't know if there are questions about enrollments in particular. I think in the backups, Sam, did we put the enrollment numbers by LEA, or was that in yesterday's backups? Okay. I think it was in yesterday's
believe
backups.
it was in yesterday's backups.
So yeah, so if you want to see what happened with October 1 counts for specific LEAs, that is in yesterday's backup and under the item where I presented. So you can kind of look, LEA by LEA if you're interested. All right, if we can move on. Okay, so these are the programs that were updated with the mid-year update. So all of the basic school programs, and whenever you hear the term WPU, those are the programs. Often WPU is used synonymously with or unrestricted funds or with the kindergarten and grades 1 through 12 program, but they're actually WPUs throughout all of those programs. They use different formulas. If you hear about the term hold harmless, which isn't, as many people think, that they will not go down from the legislative estimates, that's not true. But the hold harmless is to you get the higher of 22 ADM or projected 23 ADM. That only applies to kindergarten and grades 1 through 12. It doesn't apply to the other programs. And we've already had some difficult conversations with certain leaders, especially in charter schools, who had enrollments come in quite a bit less and are having to adjust their budgets for that. And so I'm going to go in and spend most of the time on the changes in the basic school program. So I think you can go ahead to next slide, and I think probably the next slide after that, Cami. Okay. So if you could scroll down slightly so we could see the full table here. So this is the key table I wanted to spend some time on. So this table here shows the legislative estimate WPUs for all of the basic school programs. Sorry to be duplicative on that. Shows the balance of WPUs from what was appropriated, and then the dollar balance. And Cami, just so you know, some of these slides are just highlighting certain areas. So we can move to the next slide. I think we'll just focus first on the legislative estimates part of that. All right, so let's use grades 1 through 12 as an example there. So of what was appropriated of the WPU, 612,408 were allocated out, and that was according to statute and rule using our projections, as I said, and there was a balance of 600,000. So what happened in the mid-year update, if you look at the grades 1 through 12? Well, the WPUs allocated to all of the LEAs went down by 312 WPUs, and now there's a balance of 1.8 million in that program. And so the change was even more dramatic on the kindergarten side. And it's a similar story to what I told you, because there's similar data sets from and projecting for next year versus for this year. Let's go to the next slide. I think that's just highlighting the mid-year update side of this. Let's continue to the next slide. Sorry, Cami. Okay, so right here in your backups, there's a comparison program by program for every single LEA. So let's just look at, so we know that kindergarten's down overall, but you'll see that, this is looking at some of the school districts. Let's just take Alpine, for example. Alpine alone is down 381 WPUs, or 11% in their kindergarten class. And so, yeah, kindergarten classes are down across the board, but it was pretty striking to see where those October 1 counts came in, as well as the 22 ADM. Both of those are driving that. So hopefully just can orient you to that. Let's go to the next slide. So this is an example of the table for grades 1 through 12. And so that backup goes through all of the programs. And now I'm just showing you an example with some charter schools here. And you can see that charter schools often or sometimes in certain circumstances have even bigger swings than the district. So for example, Utah Arts Academy, their WPUs are down 20%, where Fast Forward Charter High School is up 35%. And this is not year over year. This is the same year. This is just comparing projections to actuals. So as an example, Fast Forward Charter High School, they they have about 400 kids and added 60 kids above projections, which is a sizable increase for that kind of, and so that's what's being accounted for in the mid-year update. So hopefully that can make sense for you, and you can look, and especially as you look at those LEAs within your districts, you can be armed with this information. And so usually when LEA folks reach out to me, then I go through the actual formula to explain what changed so that they can understand that, what were our projections versus the actuals, and so they can understand how those WPUs were driven. All right, so if we can go to the next slide. So similar to yesterday, the special education add-on, we saw significant growth in it. And you can see that even in the legislative estimates that there was a deficit there, and the legislature kind of planned for that. But there was growth beyond what was planned. You can see there was a $3 million deficit in that program that went to a $10 million deficit. And so this is the first year I do want to highlight that the special education add-on had a mid-year update. And the reason why in House Bill 13, I think you can go to the next slide, Cami. House Bill 113 made some important changes to that program. In basically what it did was it moved up all of the calculations a year. And so when you did that, when they were 2 and 3 years prior, if you're looking at those differences, we had all the data. And so what we calculate in the legislative estimates didn't change, but we had to use projections this year because of moving up these formulas by a year. And, we did our best to use a methodology similar to what had been done with using a 5-year average of growth and these sort of things. But that's one thing I'm going to look at to see if we can improve our projection methodology, because we were quite a bit off on certain LEAs. And there were a number of LEAs that had concerns about the changes in their special education add-on. We've also seen some LEAs that this highlighted the need for accurate reporting of all their students, because it really showed that this is what drives their funding. But yeah, the story overall is the same, that the growth WPUs were up quite a bit and more than expected for the mid-year updates. So we can go to the next slide. So this is just to show you, I think I showed, so just for districts and charters, you can see that overall there are more WPUs being added in the program, but you can see that that didn't mean that every single LEA received an increase. And again, it goes back to the data. If your SPED population grew faster than we expected, then you received an increase. If not, then you received a decrease. But you can see that the increases generally are larger than the decreases, especially on the district side. Next slide. On the charter side, that wasn't always the case. You can see that there were some significant decreases on a percentage basis for charter schools. Also some significant increases on a percentage basis. So, again, projections are not what driving the mid-year update. That's why it's really important. We do our very best on projections, but at the end of the day, we want to base funding on actual students, actual counts, where they are. And that's what's changing in the mid-year update. All right, next slide. So let me quickly move on the other two line items related to basic school programs and the voted and board local levies. Next slide. So this table shows you the major updates that occurred in those other two programs, and these are the biggest programs generally in the related to basic. And, some of them didn't have at a program level an overall change. So for example, the educator professional time, which is a new program that was championed by this board and moved forward. So it's still 64 million that's being allocated, but the allocations at the LEA level changed, and that's due to new cactus counts. So if you had 30 teachers last year, we actually allocated 80% at the beginning of the year, and we held back 20% so that we could allocate that amount out based on the new updates. So your allocation went up or down. Let's say if you had 25 students or teachers rather than 30, then your allocation went down, and maybe you didn't get much or any of that 20%. Or if it went to 35 students or teachers, then you got a good portion of that 20%. Charter school local replacement is the one that's down quite a bit, and that's because even though there's growth in the charter sector, that overall they were below our projections, and that's why there's $5 million less allocated in charter school local replacement. The per student amount did not change. And then I don't really have anything else to add for these, but the adjustment factors I think are important. Just you can see, okay, what was adjusted for each of these programs. So if somebody said, hey, our charter school based funding changed, well, let's look at your October 1 counts, and vice versa, depending on program. So happy to answer any specific questions. And we didn't provide a breakout for all these programs, LEA by LEA, but we can provide that information if you'd like that. And that, I believe, concludes my presentation. Cami, if you can go to the next slide. Here's our contact information. Please reach out to us with any questions. We'd be happy to do, a funding 101, an MSP 101, or drill down in more detail on any specific programs, formulas, and those sort of things. And happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Dale. And thanks for all the work over these especially the last couple months, as that information comes in and with a lot of change going on. So really appreciate the clarity of helping us understand it. I do think it would be helpful to have that backup or distributed, broken by LEA, so we can kind of do further digging. So thanks for that offer, suggestion. Any comments or questions from committee members? Okay. Well, we greatly appreciate your wizardry with these numbers and keeping all the trains moving. So thank you very much. I think we can move on to the next one then.
Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, so if we can, the next one is the pupil transportation business case. So I just want to give a little bit more background on this as well. I'm sure all of you have heard by now about the concern with the code that was changed towards the end of the last legislative session. Essentially, the code was changed to read that no LEA, or that each LEA has to be held to under 85% of their costs being from state funding. That resulted in some unintended consequences, right? I'm not saying that there was this intent, and what resulted is less of a weighting of efficiencies, right? But why we feel it's important that you, the finance committee, see this pupil transportation is in future days here, probably this month, we'll be engaged with the legislative fiscal analysts, Ben and Michael, to determine what can we do better with the code. Can the code be changed? And we have some recommendations here as well. So if we could turn it back over to Director Uri, I think you'd probably call on our transportation coordinator, Ron Litchfield, for the details. Thank you, sir.
You bet. Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Correct. Yeah, we did address kind of the statutory language change. And if we can ask the backup, there's a presentation here that Ron has prepared regarding, we did look at potentially doing a mid-year update, which we haven't done in the past, for people transportation to try to mitigate some of those effects. And I'll allow Ron to go through this and give you a little bit of background on the hard work that he and his team have done to kind of try to mitigate some of those impacts as best we could. But we're appreciative of him and his detailed work in this regard. So I'd like to recognize Ron Litchfield, our pupil transportation specialist.
Thank you, Ron. And I think you've got another new position, right? Maybe that we're talking about that later.
Right, that's the next item.
We'll hold on that then. Thank you, Ron.
Okay, thanks. I'm Ron Litchfield. I'm the Pupil Transportation Specialist at the State Board of Education. And as we talk about our idea, a couple months ago, we introduced this idea of doing a mid-year update for transportation and trying to update our funding so we have the least amount of impact to our LEAs. We have identified some additional challenges with doing that. And so as kind of my main recommendations here is, we introduced our statute change for withholding a certain percentage of funds to be able to award districts who are efficient. And we'll go into, a little bit more of the support for that recommendation in this PowerPoint. The next piece is we're recommending that we utilize the spring estimate for FY23 for a couple of reasons. The first is that our districts have already budgeted for these changes with this 85% impact. The second piece is, as we looked at our mid-year updates, we had some secondary effects that would in fact hurt some of our districts even more. And our third piece is we're still recommending that we update our formula to meet hopefully our approved policy change and use a new formula for next year. We can go to the next slide. This has been kind of a challenging year because we have, for the last couple of years, based our funding on 2019 data. And with that, we've been increasing funds, and this 85% cap as we transition back has really affected our LEAs. Our main reason for, trying to see what unintended consequences, what impacts, and do everything we can to minimize those impacts to our LEAs. We can go to the next. So there's a few different challenges with our existing formula, and our formula is very difficult to understand. We've actually created kind of more of a summary page of our formula that helps make the formula a little easier to understand. One of the challenges that we had was our efficiency measures were not broken out and they were not transparent. So we've also included each district's efficiency, the measures, and how much additional funding or a reduction in funding the district receives because of their efficiency or inefficiency. One of the next challenges that we had was we had a couple of overfunded LEAs, and this is more in part by us continuing to up our transportation funding levels. And so last year was one of the first years that we really saw us, changing back to using current data, that we did see some overfunded LEAs. And then, the last piece is that anytime we have such a complicated formula, any adjustment has other consequences. I'm not going to go over this in real detail, but we tried to simplify our formula into a visual document, something you could see the different steps. And as you look at it, there's a lot of different pieces. Everything in blue is kind of our data inputs or outputs that affect key pieces in our formula. And I'll kind of go over in the next slide some of the main components of our transportation formula at a high level. So the first piece that we use in our transportation funding formula is we want to calculate the average cost per mile a minute for each LEA. And in order to do that, we've worked to include all the appropriate object codes. So from the annual financial reports for pupil transportation, so that we make sure that we have consistency among our LEAs. We're accepting all the eligible to from transportation object codes in that cost per mile and cost per minute calculation. The second part is that we use averages to allocate legislative funding proportionally to LEAs that are more efficient. So there's, in our transportation formula, we've had three key pieces, and one is we have our legislative funding. Our second is we have an efficiency measure, and our third is we have a base funding amount that goes to every LEA to help fund basic operations of the transportation program. And so with this efficiency measure, our next step was to make that efficiency measure more transparent. And then the third piece to our formula is, adjusting and reallocating funds from districts that are capped at 85% and redistributing those funds to less efficient districts. The next part here is just kind of talking about the impact of that 85% statute change. This caused significant year-over-year reductions in funding for certain districts. Some of the unintended consequences, and I don't know that it wasn't intentional. This was something that wasn't clear in our formula as well. So, this impacts, funding of a little over $3 million in funding from efficient districts to be redistributed to inefficient or less efficient districts. And then some of the things that we identified was that, we're seeing a larger impact of funding reduction for our rural districts. And part of that is that along the Wasatch Front on our urban districts, there's a little more competition. We've seen just this last year a lot of bus driver wages and salary increases in attempt to get more school bus drivers. And that has dramatically increased the costs of our urban districts. And what we're seeing in our rural districts is they haven't had such an increase of their transportation costs. And so just because of them not moving with the rest of the urban districts, they are actually becoming more efficient than they have in previous years. And there probably will be some catch up. Our rural districts are looking at ways that, things that they can do to help with their driver shortage as well. But there hasn't been such a localized competition for employment there. This is a kind of a more of a visual of the impacts to rural versus urban and our state averages. We have our costs associated with to and from transportation. You can see that a rural district is traveling more miles and more minutes on their activity and field trips. So as a result, they have a lower average of to and from transportation costs. And under statute, we only fund to and from school transportation costs. So the rural districts are putting a little bit more investment into their activity and field trips. The average efficiency, as we looked at what impact with, on average for the rural districts, if rural districts are more efficient, 16% versus urban at 0% as an average. The impacts of the 85%, we're seeing rural being impacted -9%, where urban is receiving 1.2% on this average. The number of LEAs capped on the spring estimate and our comparison of number of LEAs capped on the mid-year update, you can see that there's a significant increase, 4 to 12 for our rural districts and 3 to 9 for our urban districts. Some of the big concerns with our statute change is, me reaching out to our business administrators, to our transportation directors, and, their concerns are they've worked very hard to be efficient. And, it's much easier to be inefficient. I've also heard this has now become the best incentive to spend money. And, as they spend money, they get a portion of that funding back. And, for years, we've talked about how approved route funding in statute is based on the most efficient and economic routes. And that is another challenge that we're facing. This is the comparison of the spring estimate to our mid-year update. And as you can see on the second to right column, we have in green, we have districts that would receive an increase in funds, and in red, we have districts that would receive a decrease in funds. And some of the challenges that we see is that districts that were heavily impacted with this statute change of 85% are being impacted even further with a mid-year update. And the second part is we want to recognize that our districts have been budgeting for our spring update and recommend that they continue to budget for that spring update, as we recommend using the spring estimate to fund transportation this year. And just to kind of recap our statute change, we're recommending allowing the board to set aside a percentage of funds for pupil transportation that can be redistributed to districts that demonstrate efficiencies. This would not be a funding request, but a request to withhold a portion of the funds that we're already requesting. The second piece is that we already collect all the data to determine efficient and inefficiencies in districts, and there would be no more reporting requirements for districts. This would just be another step in our transportation formula on our end to distribute funds to efficient districts. And then just last is my contact information. And I couldn't do all this transportation funding without Joe Hovey, our fiscal monitor for pupil transportation. He's really helped me dig into the fine details in our transportation formula, helping to determine where to place these changes with the efficiency cap, so that we have the least impact to our school districts. And I'll take any questions if you guys have any.
Thank you very much. A lot of moving pieces, both in statute and on the ground, literally on the ground. Any questions from committee members? I'll ask a question in terms of next steps. We do have a business case. Are we looking at some point for a recommendation from this board towards the legislative session?
Yeah,
on
Chair.
that language?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, okay. Cammy's doing it. If we could pull up the business case. And I just want to double check with Sam and Dale, or Sam and Ron. It's been updated, right? So the presentation that you've just seen, the business case has been updated to capture that. So
That's correct. Yeah.
yeah. So where the board had already directed that this go forward, right? This is another reason why we wanted to have the presentation, because we also need to make sure that, administratively, at least, that whenever we, get new information or do any updates, that you're aware of this, and this is where we put it into the backups. Now it is flowing through finance committee, so I do understand that the whole board isn't receiving this particular briefing, right? But we just want to absolutely make sure that we are following your direction, that you approve the business case going forward. But as we've been developing this, these in addressing the unintended consequences, that we feel strongly that $12 million of ongoing funding will help mitigate against those unintended consequences, or help this, I guess, the sting. I really need to be clear though, there are particular districts that, when the code was changed, it affected them. They did lose significant amounts of money. And while this does help, right? I'm not sure we would ever be able to get back to the level that they were at because of that wording, that each LEA will not exceed 85%. I mean, we will do our level best. I think we're demonstrating that here today to you, the finance committee members, to find allowable and acceptable and legal ways to offset that change in code and the unintended consequences. And then, like I said, this was also important for us to do this. So you had situational awareness that we are engaged with the LFA, because, you know, we may actually or eventually ask for a change to the code, right? And, you know, by meeting with the LFA and doing that, they actually may be the ones to provide a solution. But did I answer your question, Chair?
Yeah, thank you. The business case, then, that's gotten the approval that it needs. Are there tweaks to that business case that still have not been reviewed by the board and approved, or has that already come through, all the stuff you're talking about that you need?
Yeah, if I may, Deputy Superintendent
please.
Jones, the amount of money is unchanged, so it's still the $12 million, and the issue is without that statutory request that the board approved yesterday, it would be hard to distribute any of that extra money to these districts that are already capped, right? And so that gives us the flexibility to make some of those adjustments for rural districts like, for example, San Juan School District that already is seeing some impacts. And then as Ron so eloquently pointed out, you know, we looked really hard at if we use a little bit more current data, is there any way that they're having some costs that we can capture, and it really was still you know, not in their favor, and we're not trying to play favorites here, right? We're trying to make it equitable across LEAs across the system, but that's really, there is no further changes at this point needed to the business case. So
Got it. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any further questions from board members. Do we anticipate support for the code change on the Hill?
So just from initial indications, you know, we have yet to have like a formal meeting with the LFA on this. But remember, sir, staff are very conscientious about trying to make sure that we run these things past, even if it's not an action item, even if it's just an information item, run these things past you first before we engage, you know, decisively, so to speak, set the meeting up, do this. You know, this is why I say, hey, you know, just for your situational awareness, now we're gonna, you know, meet with the legislator. In our cases, with the legislative staff, not a legislator, but then it could turn into a bill file or a request for appropriation by a legislator, something like that. But at a minimum, we wanted to make sure that you, being representative of 1/3 of the board and our finance committee, which this obviously is a financial lane, right? That you had this first. So what we're doing better at too is that when we do meet with them and we come back, remember, you guys will start meeting. Well, I shouldn't say you guys. Remember, the board will meet or will be scheduled to meet once per week once the gavel drops for the session to start. So that's where we really get an opportunity to keep you updated on, you know, hey, you know, we met with the LFA. Oh, hey, now, you know, Angie is just so awesome about, you know, tracking all the bill files to get open. And I think you'll see a really good correlation of, you know, what staff are doing up on the Hill with what your direction is, right? More so than it being, you know, more of a staff like, hey, you know, we're just doing this, and we are really trying to make sure you all stay informed. So I know I always give the long answers to the good short questions, but does that help, sir? You know, it's just really important to me. This is really important to me that you know that we take your direction seriously, that you, the board, directed that, you know, we seek this, and that is, you know, we develop these processes with them. We take every opportunity to keep you informed. I know that it's a lot of information for you, but that's really what the gist of all this is, sir. So over.
Great answer. Hugely appreciate the answer, and also, just as you pointed out, bringing it to us so that we know what's going on, and we've had oversight and the ability to, you know, kind of give that direction and then follow up and support, and certainly want to help support that effort if needed, as you take this up in the legislative session. Any board member questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you all. That is a lot of information, but we're so glad to have it and glad to have it in backup for further offline deep dives if we have additional questions. So thank you much. Okay, let's see. I think we're on to action item 7, correct? Or is there anything left in 6, Deputy Jones? Or
No, sir. I think we can close
Okay.
6, sir.
on to recognition.
Right. So item number 7. So we're gonna, and hey, Ron, you got to turn your camera back on, man. Come on. Right on. Okay. So we want to, we take every opportunity possible to recognize just how brilliant our staff are, and that there are external agencies, entities that really recognize our staff by choosing them to lead, by choosing them to be part of their organization, not only to be part of their organization, but to be a leader of their organization. And I think this is where we see this with Ron. So we wanted to make sure that, and it does tie into the fact that he provided a great update to you on pupil transportation, but so that you can see that we have other organizations out there that recognize just how professional and how technically proficient our staff are. And as you can see, I won't read it, but you can see that Ron has definitely been recognized for that and is now serving in I would say a higher capacity with the NASDPTS. So if we could recognize Director Yuri, I'm sure he can provide just a little bit more detail quickly in our efforts to recognize our outstanding staff.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Man.
Yeah, we just on a personal note, Ron's a great person to work with. I know all of you know that, but yeah, the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation is kind of the association for people like Ron that direct the state pupil transportation services for their state education agency. And so Ron has been nominated and elected as the Western Regional Director. So he'll be heading up the Western Region meetings and then participating at the board meetings and the national conferences. As an additional bonus, we get a little bit of state savings on his airfare and lodging and those sorts of things. And so, it's great news all around. So I just wanted to congratulate Ron and thank him for his continued service here at the State Board of Education for all of the students here in Utah.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Great to hear, and we're always happy to see people recognize the awesomeness that comes out of Utah, and look forward to, there's a great chance for collaboration there and sharing, and a lot of that comes from sharing what Utah's doing. So congratulations. Comment, question from Member Hart?
Yeah, I also want to say that not only is this a great honor, but I appreciate when employees go above and beyond and contribute in these ways. And I'm reading this, and the line, "This should not increase my workload." Yeah, I hope it doesn't, but all of us know that when we got on the board, our workload increased. So, but that's not a bad thing. I have there's zero concerns that that increased responsibility would affect, that only helps our organization. That's not a detractor. You don't have to worry that that's a concern, at least on my part. I think that, like Chair Moss said, that this benefits our organization, and it's just a win-win for everyone. So congratulations and thank you. So well done.
Vice Chair Norton, did I see a hand up? I don't see you now. Okay, it's off.
It was just an applause.
Right on. Okay, well, thank you again for your service and congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. On to USIMS, I believe. Let's see.
Yes, sir. So this month is not, as you know, we do provide a monthly update. And then once a quarter, we go extensively through it. This is not this month where we go slide by slide. However, if you'd recognize Director Felt, and I believe Katrina's with us as well, they do want to call out some particulars or just, you know, some key takeaways from this month's update. Not go slide by slide, but just draw your attention to a couple of key pieces of it. So
You bet. Thank you.
Guys, Director Felt, please, sir.
Jared?
Yeah, and Chair, if you don't mind, I'll just turn it over to Katrina. She'll just speak to this one slide.
Sure, yeah, you bet. Thanks, Katrina.
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. Thank you for letting me be here. I just wanted to touch base really quickly on one aspect of the PMR for this month. Cami, if you'll slide down to, it's like the second to last slide, or the one right before that, like I think it's 9 or 10. Yes, that one, thank you. You'll note that there is a note here that salary and contractor pay was exponential this month. That's just because we caught up after having the PO closed by the state for the last 3 months. So we have 3 months worth of salary and contractor pay that is recognized for this month. Just in case that stressed you out a little bit, divide that by 3, and that's about our monthly spend right now.
What's the backup there? The PO was closed?
Yes, so the state finance office had closed the USIMS PO on accident. There was conversation with them trying to get it reopened. We ended up opening a new one. So,
And the PO is what's
the purchase order? It's what allows us to pay everybody.
yeah, okay, all right. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it in terms of the highlights?
Well, then, sir, I just want to emphasize when we did do a further drill down on this, you know, one of the biggest issues has always been, you know, recruitment and retainment of outside third-party vendor type programmers, right? We are seeing a definite change in the trajectory of it, meaning that, you know, we're in, you know, Katrina and Jared can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's good news too. I just wanted to take a second month here and just tell you that we're really getting close to filling all the necessary positions. Our retainment looks good. You know, in the past we would hire people, but then they would leave 2 or 3 months later, right? And so it seems like we're getting pretty stable now, which exponentially increases the velocity of the project, right? If you keep your, you know, if you can fill the positions you need to run it, and then they stay on long term, you know, we're going to see a lot of increases. The other thing I think that all of us need to know for situational awareness is we're likely going to get questioned at some point on the Hill about what's referred to as the student backpack. I do want to make sure, and I'll do this, you know, if we're called to testify on our progress towards resolving that long-standing, never got quite there yet requirement of a student backpack from legislation that dates clear back to, I think, and if Aaron's still in here, he can remind me of what year the legislation first came out. But former Senator Stevenson, obviously, like, you know, sponsors of the USIMS bill are very concerned that, you know, the board and staff have not met that requirement for that student backpack. We will meet the requirement as part of this USIMS project. I get that we're still out of compliance with the code that said you have to have this done. But that was a big piece of the USIMS project, in addition to the other domains, because the student backpack is just in the student domain. But we're really going to make we have been making a concerted effort to get to what right is and meet that original intent and I understand from so many years ago, to establish what's referred to as the student backpack within the systems, you know, where parents can access student data, you know, and one of the biggest reasons why it goes along is we really absolutely have to be safe and secure with our student data and making sure that we're clear on who can access what amounts of data they can access. You know, if a parent wants to, for example, say, I don't want a particular set of data on my student available to anyone else, that we can accommodate that. So it has taken time. It has taken a lot of time. I understand their frustration. I understand their concern, but we will get there. I put my word on that, and I just hope that they'll recognize that if and when, I don't think it's an if, it's when we get called out for having gone so many years without being compliant to providing what was defined as a student backpack. But the trajectory that we are in the student domain is good. And by all intents and purposes and indications, we will get there. So I appreciate the opportunity to, that piece has just come to my attention within the last day or so, that there will likely be asked to testify on where we're at with the student backpack. So component of this. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I just follow up on that? Where does that fall then in terms of the, next items and priorities for completion of that student backpack within all the other moving pieces?
Yeah, so if you'll recognize Katrina again, she'll be able to articulate that very well. So
thanks, Katrina.
Yes, so we are currently in the student domain working on assessments. Assessments became top priority for a number of reasons, mostly because we've got a system that's going to be out of date as of October, and we need to get it off of there. So with assessments, we are going to get pieces of the student backpack. There's going to be enrollment, there's going to be class enrollment and things like that will need to be created. So we will be working on pieces. The full backpack probably will not be complete within the next year, but we will get sections of it. So you'll see those coming shortly. The next thing that's coming up is the USIMS homepage that will actually give a login for parents and guardians to start getting into USIMS. So that will be coming shortly. And
Great.
If I may mention, while I have the floor, I did send out 4 offers for developers yesterday. If all of those developers accept, we will only have 1 developer position open after this. So I'd just like to celebrate the hard work that the teams have put in and really making sure that hiring is moving forward.
Hallelujah. Thank you. Congrats.
Thank you.
Talent coming in is beautiful to see. I see Director Bruff. Aaron?
Good morning, Aaron Bruff, data coordinator. Anyway, coordinator for data and statistics. And I just wanted to add, so student achievement backpack, I mean, as Scott was saying, it is, I have to look it up as well. I believe it was 2012 that Senator Stevenson ran that. And just for your information, I had a phone call this week with the Virginia legislature. They have a different name. I don't remember what it was, the House comment. Well, anyway, talked with them. They're interested in our student achievement backpack bill, and they've been reaching out and asking informations on it. And also apologize for my background. I'm working on multiple devices today, and this one doesn't have my background uploaded into it. So anyway.
No worries. Yeah, thank you. Great. Thanks for the update. Great to hear. Okay, anything further on USIMS? Questions, comments from board? Oh, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. So no, that closes the this agenda item and specific to the PMR, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you as always for the updates. Let's see. Last one, information item 8, request for data and information. Let's see, do we have anything this month?
Well, so I was gonna see, sir, if you would consider, there was some requests for data and information made by board members in the main board meeting yesterday. Specifically like board member Klein had some requests. So, and then the chair said, well, in this instance, I think she said 2 other, I think it was Chair Davis at the time said, hey, well, you need 2 other board members. I just want to make it clear. I felt like this is an opportunity to make it clear that we can also incorporate, that process too, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a finance committee member that makes a request, and that the finance committee members can say, hey, on behalf of a board member outside of the finance committee, let's do this. I just felt like that was essential that we clarify that. Because, board members sometimes say, well, gosh, I'd really like this information next month, but if I have to go find 2 other board members, I can do that. So there is this, we can facilitate requests along the lines of what board member Klein made yesterday. If one of you or 2 of you bring it and say, we'd also like to benefit from that data. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Vice Chair Norton.
Yes, I had it written down on my paper right here. Board Member Klein's request. She would like to have a breakout of the academic costs from the physical, social, mental, and continuity of services. And I thought that sounded like good information that, we could get at least quarterly or, once a year to see how some of these costs are being split out. So there's the second request.
And I'll join that. I'm curious if somebody has a quick way to address what that would look like. Because I think it would be very helpful. How would we kind of do that teasing out of the data?
Sir, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so her request came as part of the update that was provided on the AFR ESSER funds, right? She wanted some more details on that. So where you've asked, or this request for data and information, we first and foremost, make sure board member Klein knew that you did this and that we were working on it. So then my staff, and this is really, relevant to finance committee, right? Because it's costly, right? But yes, or however, it is related specifically to the AFR ESSER funding. So then staff here would coordinate with Sarah Harward and Sarah Young. And then what we could do is when, because you, Chair Moss, provide a back brief to the board the next month, right? If we're ready and we have the data, you could say, last month, board member Klein requested this data related to ARP ESSER. And the next day in finance committee members supported or, said, hey, staff, go get this data, and we could present that data in item number 8. And then you as the board can make the decision, how often, because basically once we get that data, it would likely just go or become a perpetual part of the AFR ESSER updates from that point forward, right? So we can figure that. So either way, we'd meet the intent, of doing it, but it just shows a lot of synergy between board members who are outside of the committee, if that makes sense. And we're more than willing to configure the future presentations to address or have that level of detail in there for board member Klein and you as the board. So did that make sense, sir? I mean, it's just
thank
it's
you.
a synergetic effort. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Sir.
I see hands up, and I'd be curious to see kind of before it comes maybe on our agenda to have maybe preliminary kind of sense of what that looks like, in the sense of how do you isolate and highlight those different areas that member Klein addressed. So I think that would be a great idea. I see member Hutchings' hand up.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and it would be really important data to have. It's unfortunate that the request didn't come at the beginning, and to go backwards, I'm trying to think through what that would take. I'm curious if anyone thinks that it would be easy information to pull that they already have. I'm not sure how, because we saw the categories in the grant applications in Utah grants. We saw the categories yesterday that were being required as far as how the money was budgeted. And so that is the information, from what I understand, that would be readily available, that could be pulled. But what is being asked, from what I understand, is not something that has already been reported. And so then USBE would have to go back to each of the schools and say, can you go back through and try to figure out how you use this money in the past? And then you're going to have a lot of questions about, well, is this, accelerating learning? Is this for academics? We hired a para to do this, or we bought hand sanitizer for that. And there are probably a myriad of examples that the schools would say, would you say, does this qualify or does that qualify? I think going backwards, I'm just saying I anticipate will be very difficult. I do, from my own school experience, I know ESSER 3 did have a separate budget category for accelerated learning because we're required, I think it was to spend at least 20% on accelerated learning. And so ESSER 3 is going to be a little different. I will say most schools, from my experience, lowballed that and probably spent a lot more on accelerated learning, but that budget category will be there for ESSER 3, but for the other budget categories, I think it's going to be a mess trying to get that information personally, but I think it's a great idea and would have been awesome way back when to ask for that breakout so the schools could have been reporting it all along. And I think it's a great idea going forward to ask for that information.
Yeah, thank you. And that kind of goes to part of my question. Just what does this look like? I mean, we have a lot of these things in the ESSER plans that were in some way intended to improve student learning, and some are more, kind of directly tied to a reportable use than others, and others sort of had a broader description. And so maybe that's part of what we're doing here is sort of maybe the first step is to kind of hear next finance committee just what that might look like. And I can anticipate that as we have this reporting and requirements task force going on, that that would be a question that could be raised there as well. What are you asking me to do exactly? And so maybe that's our first step, but just a thought that we kind of get our head around what that might look like and review that in January. I'm just throwing that out there. Vice Chair Norton, and I see Sarah Young's joined us too.
I'm just going to make a quick comment, and then I'm sure Sarah Young's got the answer to this, but I was, and maybe it would not be what Board Member Klein looked at. And I totally agree with Board Member Hutchings. We cannot go back and dig. But even if we could split out the M&O, the ongoing services and the health and safety from the more academic, maybe we could just make that different, whatever that word, differentiation would be. But let's hear from Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, please. Welcome.
Great. Thank you for having me. So Sarah Young, Chief of Staff. I apologize, no video. I also have a child who is doing remote learning, taking bandwidth from my participation today. So my apologies. In terms of the request for information, I'll just loop back to Board Member Hutchings' statements, and she is correct. So in order to gather that specific data, we would really need two pieces. First and foremost, we would need a clear definition from the board on how you would like those different aspects defined. So what would you define as kind of the academic specific related, and how would you define kind of the other categories? Currently, just so you know, the definitions that we use are very specific to what is required for federal reporting. And I'll be really transparent, those are very narrow definitions. And in terms of narrow, in many ways, they are defined using very federally explicit categories that may not necessarily align with the previous conversation about what the board is looking for. The second component, once we had those categories, we would need to return to the LEAs and ask them to do another set of reporting. I would note to this committee that our traditional work related to ESSER is that we do one request for information where we capture the federal requirements, the state requirements, and our legislative interested requirements all in a single tool. We do that to try and help reduce the reporting and requirements burden for the LEAs, noting that this is, requirements that we have to adhere to, but we also want to be thoughtful about how we ask them to use their time and effort in addition to the financial reporting requirements that are already in place. So we can certainly do that. But again, I would just note it would be in addition to the work that's already been reported.
Thank you very much, Chief of Staff Young. And I want to hear from other board members logistically. Would it make sense perhaps for this committee to hear next month a little bit more detailed review of what data is available and what it would take to get more data along these lines? Or do folks feel like we have a specific direction that we could provide to come here? I feel like we probably need a bit more information before actually making a data request, that we need to know, be guided in how to frame that and what the burden would be. And I know, again, from our reporting and requirements task force, that the last thing we want to do is add to that burden. But I felt, and Chief of Staff Young and I talked early on in the ESSER money, that this was going to be one of those forced experiments from which we were going to be able to learn quite a few things if we tracked it. So I guess part of my question is, some of this might require requests from the field. Others might be things that we can do in-house to take a look at what we were already getting and see if we have some visibility and insight there that could be reported. So Vice Chair Norton or anybody else, any thoughts on the best way to move forward?
Yeah, this is just my own personal opinion. I feel like we have been given a massive amount of information already. I also feel like we are coming to the end of this funding anyway, and we, should be moving forward and looking forward. I don't know that looking back now on how we should have spent money that we're not going to be getting in the future is, worth the squeeze. I think that we have received a lot of information, and there might be things in that information we've already received, but I think we've got enough on our plates moving forward to not request our LEAs or our staff to be requiring new information.
Yeah, and I'll just respond. I would think the same thing, that any benefit of looking backward would be for the purpose of learning lessons for going forward, but that burden has to be really respected. And I am curious, as we come out of this funding, that it is the massive opportunity, and wonder if we might just explore the possibility and the burden. What's the most cost efficient way perhaps to look at what was done, and that now as we start to see results from it, that's another piece that's not within, I think, Member Klein's request. I think she's focused on where it went, but that might help inform lessons learned as we kind of evaluate what was done with this influx. I see Chair Huntsman's hand up too. Mark,
you're muted.
Hang on here. There you go. I think you got to put a lot of caution in looking in that rear view mirror, because the table was set to roll this money out in a very aggressive way on the federal side and then also on the state, and it wasn't set up to take this hard looking back. It was limited. There was some limitations on funding to meet those certain requirements, but the burden, the heavy reporting burden, and that's associated with looking in that rear view mirror is super significant. And the big question is, what are you going to do with the data? Are you going to judge them, each LEA, in a way, say, well, what did you do and why did you do it? And didn't you know you could have done it different? And every LEA is going to say, well, I shoulda, woulda, coulda. If I could have a do-over on this, I would maybe do this or that. But under those exact circumstances, well, guess what? We're not going to have another, well, we hope we don't have another pandemic and another, I think again, looking in that rear view mirror, I think we've already asked our LEAs through the application side and that to submit that information that you're talking about, Chair Moss. And I think that's got to do unless somebody wants to fund. Maybe if the board wants this information and take some of the board's discretionary funding and give it to the LEAs to say, okay, feed me more information. But the big question is, what are you going to do with it when you're done? I don't think it's going to help with the learning losses and some of these other challenges that we have, that we already know we have moving forward. So I just throw a big caution on. We've got the windshield to be looking at, and that's where we're going with our kids. And when you make that rear view mirror the size of the windshield, it's going to cause, I think it's going to cause a lot of heartache and hurt on what we're trying to do for our kids moving forward. Roger.
Thank you, Chair. So maybe it sounds like there's not an appetite for a specific request in this committee, something to think about and let percolate. I personally would love to see lessons learned from this. We would never have sat down and said, hey, let's see if we can get $600 million through a pandemic and then try some things with that money. But we were forced to do that. And so I do think there's an opportunity at some point to look, not for purpose of judging or second guessing anything, that our LEAs scrambled and complied and gave the data. I think there is an opportunity to say, okay, how did that go? And what did we find in terms of bright spots? And, you know, I think there's a role here perhaps for ULEAD to look at that, or internal questions that are targeted to, you know, perhaps a defined area of practice where we say, all right, there was a lot of money spent on tutoring, for example. You know, where did we see the best results that we might learn from as that funding goes away and folks have to reevaluate their priorities? I think there's going to be some really good insight from that. But how you do that while we're still trying to pull out of it without imposing a burden, to me, is a big question. So I don't really hear an appetite for putting in a specific request, and maybe we leave that with the board unless folks see differently. I see Sam's hand up, and back to Member Hutchings.
Member Hutchings can go first. We have a data request that did come from board meeting from Member Klein, but is not related to ARP and ESSER. And so I can address this quickly after we finish the ARP discussion.
Gotcha. Okay, Stacy.
Yeah, just a quick thought from what you just said, Chair Moss, about going forward and figuring out what worked and what didn't. And along with the conversation that we had yesterday about the 990 hours for requirement for school each year, and I don't know if it's already in the works, but maybe the board going further would like to invest some funds and initiate a formal analysis overall of what worked and what didn't, and what we want to continue doing and what we learned doesn't work emerging from the pandemic. Because I think it's more than just, there's this data piece, there's the conversation about the 990 days. And I'm sure if you opened it up, there's several areas that if we did a fuller analysis, we could come back with some really great shared ideas for all the schools in the state of Utah of how to move forward and increase academic learning in the future from what we've learned with the reactions to COVID. So,
thank you. And yeah, there might be some outside funding or even some of the ULEAD funding. Sam?
Yeah, so yesterday during the October 1 enrollment discussion, Member Klein asked for some data on total student age population, including home and private school students. We are working on gathering that data, so just wanted some direction from the Finance Committee if you want us to post that here for next month or just separately email that to Board Member Klein. We're happy to do whatever pleases the Finance Committee here. So.
I wonder maybe both. I guess that's a request that didn't necessarily go into finance, but would be helpful here. So would it be best to respond to her directly? Is that the normal protocol? And then also include it for finance to the effect that, or to the extent that it is kind of a financial question?
Chair.
Yes, Scott?
Hey, sir, I recommend, yeah, I mean, you hit it spot on just both. Let us respond to her, right? And then also put it in backup, because enrollment counts are so finance centric, right? I mean, you know, not only finance, but I mean, let's face it, our enrollment counts are just really what affects financial funding for our LEAs. So I think it's relevant. I think it's something you should all see. You know, the last thing we want to do is inundate board members with just too much information, right? To where you're spending all this additional time doing it. But we also want to be cognizant and recognize that you do want information and do it. And I think it's a win-win. Now, board member Klein gets her data and information, but it ties in really well with what we just briefed you on, right? With the October 1 counts. And I think, and I don't think, Sam could correct me if I'm wrong, but this particular request, I don't think would take a lot of time. So
no, we're going to work with the Gardner Policy Institute just to get that compiled, and just kind of a combination of a couple of spreadsheets is really what it will entail. I say that, and you know, Dale and Brett are going to be the ones that that do that good work. So easy for them is what we anticipate. So
Okay. I think that concludes that item then, correct?
yes, sir.
I
Yep.
think we're there. Well, we're a half hour early, and do we have anything else, Scott? I just wanted to add a couple of concluding comments, but anything else that we need to?
Yeah, so just check in with Cammie real quick, just make sure she doesn't have any questions, so she captured the minutes right, and you know, she always does, but you know, just if she needs any clarity.
Yeah, Cammie, how are we looking?
Thanks so much.
No, I think she said she
Okay.
was good, sir. Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Well, good. We're a half hour early. I just want, if I could, to take just a short minute here. We had an opportunity to thank outgoing board members, and we were a little short on time. But for one, I hope I'm right back here in January in finance. I hope I'm not going anywhere. I love working with this group and the subject. But I wanted to just take a second here on finance to thank the first Chair Huntsman, who has been with his hand on the till, and you know, he farms and ranches, so this isn't allegorical or you know, some of us that are paper pusher lawyers don't actually get our hands dirty, but Chair Huntsman has had his hands deep down in the soil and the weeds of this finance for years, and it's so critical. And I just greatly appreciate his service, his mentoring, as those of us who came on this committee. We had, you know, Superintendent Dixon pointed out to me yesterday, and I'd forgotten that 4 of us were new on this committee. So it was Chair Huntsman, you know, literally mentoring 4 of us in what's very complicated, and just highly appreciate not just his expertise and experience, but the personal interest in helping us be effective board members as we've come up to speed here. So great thanks to him. And I know he's changed for good the way we do finance, working with all of you, and those relationships are one of the things he's modeled and mentored the most, is how our board works with staff to do this great work. So wanted to thank Chair Huntsman and also Member Hutchings, as somebody who was a fellow newbie last year, and we came on trying to get our head around the system. Just a great voice. She's experienced across the spectrum, from charter to district, from pedagogy to finance, and just have really appreciated her service on this committee. It's a great group, and you know, very sad to lose her voice and input. So just wanted to say thanks to both of you, and greatly appreciate the opportunity to serve with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can I have a concluding comment here?
I was going to ask, absolutely.
So through my time served for the last 8 years, I started in the finance, and the way circumstances and elections and that, when I really, I guess being the chair, I could choose to leave, but I never served on another one of those other committees. But I want to recognize you board members that were new to this just a couple of years ago, and for you diving in a very positive way and understand the importance of this committee. And thank you for your commitment and all the extra work that you guys have put in to understand exactly what's happening here. We have some awesome staff. Shout out to everyone on the finance side, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. A lot of the times we sport the same hairstyle, and sometimes with glasses, I get a compliment and they call me Scott when I'm different places. and I think we worked really well together. And I just wanted to let him know how much I love and appreciate him and his commitment. Scott is special, and with his talents and abilities, I know his career side. I know all of his strengths and stuff. He does not have to be with this agency. He does not have to be with USBE. He chooses to be here. He cares about kids. He cares about what right looks like. And so moving forward, I know after we brought him on the team in the very beginning that he was special, and he's very committed to this work, and you will be in good hands with him being the Deputy Superintendent of Operations. And then of course there's awesome staff. I don't want to call them, start naming them, because I'll miss him, but he knows how to surround himself and lead an awesome team. And I just want to thank you guys again for your contribution and your future contribution. Stacy, you're awesome. You stepped into this and you embraced it in a very short time, and thank you. And I hope for the best for you. And these aren't goodbyes, so we'll see you later, because I know there's much more contributions, Stacy, that you're going to make, and I'm looking forward to these existing board members as they're moving forward, the betterments that they bring. So thank you, and thanks all that are involved on the finance side, clear down into the LEA levels and everywhere else, the BAs and etc., for champion for Utah's kids. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
If I could just say really quick and acknowledge, I was absolutely put on the very best committee, and with incredible staff, run so professionally, and I've just enjoyed working with the other committee members in this during this time each month. I will take away with me a few things, including the idea of betterments being really important and a good step along the way. I've started using that term myself. And then I think most importantly, always looking to see if the juice is worth the squeeze. So I've used that many times, and a lot of times I get a confused look for a minute and then, oh, I get it. But absolutely has brought a greater perspective to the work that I do in schools and into my life. So thank you for all of your part in that.
And I'd just like to add that Chair Huntsman, I assure you that we will make sure that the water hits the end of the road. So we will carry that torch for both of you, and don't think that any of us are losing your numbers. So public comment is always welcome, especially from friendly faces such as yourself.
Thank you.
Yep, we can beam them in when we need a lifeline.
Lifeline, phone a friend.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you for all your input and friendship for those who are leaving, and the work moves on, and thank you all for the betterments we had today. So meeting adjourned, and we'll see you in a little bit.
See ya.
Take care.
Thank you.